Private equity post-Brexit. Is the UK really going to go its own way? Let's find out. The trade deal negotiated by Boris Johnson's government does not include an EU-wide arrangement for financial services. So this means in practice that UK financial firms are going to have to negotiate their own individual deals on a country-by-country basis. The so-called passporting regime has come to an end. And so how did the passport regime work? Well, this allowed UK financial firms to operate all over Europe just on the basis of being registered in the UK, because the registration or the regulation in London was deemed equivalent to be able to operate in Spain, Portugal, and all the other 27 UK countries. In the absence of passporting, equivalency decisions are sometimes seen as a way to replicate the ease of cross-border business that was normally the status quo within the European Union. Equivalence is a bit like a bilateral recognition of each other's regulations. So you recognize each other's credentials and you accept that the credentials of the other country are good enough for you and vice versa. But this equivalence regime is very, very different to the ease of market access which is represented by passporting. And why? Because financial services are regulated by quite a range of laws across the EU countries, and a lot of them do not contain equivalence regimes which allows third country firms to easily operate within the country. And so the ability of UK firms to operate in the EU under equivalency decisions and vice versa is going to be much more limited. And what is also very important to note is that equivalency decisions can often be revoked on very short notice. So that is a big limitation in terms of planning your financial operations. The only easy way that the City of London can retain its pre-Brexit access to the EU markets is if Brussels unilaterally grants equivalence. However, during the course of the negotiations, the EU took the position that the UK is going to be diverging from its financial service regulations and withheld that designation for the time being. Now, there are some efforts going on to work on it. At the moment, in early 2021, Treasury Minister John Glenn is leading talks with the EU to try and develop a memorandum of understanding by March of 2021, which would guide future regulatory cooperation in financial services. But already at the moment, it already seems quite clear that equivalence is not going to be on the table. So it's going to fall far short of the access that was previously the case. In the context, therefore, that we have no more passporting rights if one is a UK private equity fund manager, what is the potential outcome, or what are the potential future prospects? Well, let's look at it firstly from the point of view of the regulator. Now, I'm quoting here a statement made by Andrew Bailey, the Bank of England governor, on the 6th of January at a Treasury Select Committee hearing, in which he says the following: "I think it would be much better for both sides if we have open markets and therefore certainty that way. But if we don't, then of course the markets and firms will evolve. Both of us will change our rules when it's sensible to do so, and that's the basis to judge equivalence." So let's try and read between the lines of this kind of yes minister talk. So effectively what Bailey is saying is that, well, we are planning to diverge. We may well diverge, and that's the way it's going to be, and tough cookies. I mean, effectively, that's what he's saying. He's saying we reserve the right to diverge because we think that's going to be good for the industry. Of course, from a private equity point of view, do note this was a general statement relating to all financial services, so we have yet to see whether there would be some kind of different deal done for private equity. Let's contrast the statement made by Andrew Bailey, which was, quite a little bit of a Brexiteer kind of approach, with a released statement by the British Venture Capital Association, which is the main body representing the interests of private equity operators in the UK. And this statement says, "Today the ESMA and the UK FCA have published a memorandum of understanding on consultation, cooperation and exchange of information." Okay, so that's consistent with what I mentioned a little bit earlier. Invest Europe and the British BVCA, so it's a joint statement by the European Association as well as the British Association. We jointly welcome the commitment made by UK and EU competent authorities. A coherent approach to our sector's regulatory environment, particularly across the British Channel, is therefore fundamental. So what are they saying, reading between the lines? What they're saying is we don't really like the idea of the UK going its own way in terms of regulation. But obviously, one of the concerns the BVCA has is they don't want to put out a statement that sounds too much like a Remainer statement or a pro-EU statement, so they have to phrase it in an incredibly diplomatic way. So let's go on to the last part of the statement. As such, we find it opportune that the memorandum will not supersede applicable legislation and will not limit the use of existing mechanisms of crucial importance to our inherently cross-border industry. And there they're referring to things like using the possibility of using an AIFM registered in somewhere like Ireland, Luxembourg, who then subcontract back. And so it's clear from the statement, just the fact the statement between the BVCA and Invest Europe as a joint statement shows that clearly the industry body itself is deeply uncomfortable with the idea of a kind of deregulation. And so let's let the BVCA speak for itself, and let's look at this short clip which was made by the BVCA in a recent webinar.
What I doubt we're going to see, and what we would resist, is any suggestion that in the UK we'll start to diverge at a rapid pace and very significantly from what is happening in terms of global standards. And obviously, in that regard, the EU is hugely, hugely important.
It seems pretty clear from the statement made that the British private equity industry does not particularly like the idea of going alone. It seems to me they were quite happy to align themselves with European regulations. But let's think about that logically. Let's say, for example, the UK did decide to go alone on regulation for private equity. Well, what regulations do we have today globally for private equity? We've only got two. We've got Frank Dodd, 2010 Frank Dodd Act, which was to regulate the US market. And we've got the 2011 Alternative Investment Fund Managers Directive from the European Union. So the only bits of legislation regarding private equity that exist in the world are from the US and from the EU. So two very large blocks. And so what's the sense of then having a third set of regulations done just by a middle-sized country like the UK? It wouldn't make any real sense, and it's unlikely they would have much influence beyond the borders of the UK. One other important point to add to the point that I just made about regulation, that with the fact we've only got two, Frank Dodd and AIFM, is in terms of self-regulation. What do we have in terms of self-regulation for the private equity industry? Again, we have the ILPA, the International Limited Partners Association guidelines, which is based in the US. And we've got IPEV, International Private Equity Valuation guidelines on reporting and valuation. So these are the self-regulation bodies. One is US and one is pan-European. So again, in terms of the self-regulation, which is also very important for GPs and for fund managers, they're both on a kind of block basis. One is US and one is pan-EU. So again, if you look at what BVCA has done, they've aligned themselves with IPEV and ILPA standards. So again, it seems very, very unlikely that the UK on its own it makes any sense or has the clout to publish any kind of autonomous regulations. It just wouldn't make any sense. And the final thing I probably got to add is that if you saw my previous video, it seems to me that most private equity fund managers in the UK are probably not Brexiteers. If we look at the demographics of the graduate vote for Remain, which was 22%, and the fact that fund managers are graduates, overwhelmingly it would seem to me that British fund managers, with a few potential exceptions, are broadly interested in remaining aligned with the EU. So we may have a paradoxical situation, which is it's yet to be seen, but it could be that the regulator for some Brexiteer agenda decides to go and diverge from EU AIFM regulations, but the industry itself voluntarily decides to stick with it. So we might have the paradoxical situation of the regulator bringing in different standards and the industry refusing to meet those and staying with the European standards unless they were somehow coerced to change, which would not be a positive step.